topics and opinions expressed in the following show are solely those of the host and their guests and not those of W4CY Radio, its employees, or affiliates. We make no recommendations or endorsements for radio show programs, services, or products mentioned on air or on our web. No liability, explicit or implied, shall be extended to W4CY Radio or its employees or affiliates. Any questions or comments should be directed to those show hosts. Thank you for choosing W4CY Radio.
Well, hello and welcome. Good to have you here. I'm Bill Martinez, and we are live. And we've got a great show planned for you today. We got Dr. Michael Busler, the econ expert and professor, is going to be joining us to talk about all things DOGE, right? Are the numbers adding up? Do we have expectations that are realistic? I mean, there's just been so much excitement about DOGE, and I think that a lot that we expected in terms of the waste and fraud in our government is coming to be true. But can we really get down to the bottom number? Can we really be able to penetrate the bureaucracy in such a way that we can, really understand how much actual waste that we're talking about? I mean, more and more as I look at these numbers, the projected $2 trillion. I mean, at one point I thought, gosh, the way this thing is going, we could probably find $3 trillion or more, in terms of, fraud and waste. But I think we're going to be lucky to find, $1 trillion, maybe. I don't know. I mean, it's just, it's hard to tell because some numbers come out and then they're corrected. And, it's very dynamic and very fluid as to what's going on. And of course, the government has planned it that way. It's rather been, rather purposeful. I mean, you think about all the shenanigans, for example, that we experienced with the Biden family fraud situation, that they had 10 different sources of revenue, how they were coming in. And it's not sources of revenue, but just where the banking, the way it was kind of convoluted in such a way. I mean, Bo Donald had said that, with his experience in dealing with money laundering, this is very typical. This is what they do. And so a lot of sleight of hand, a lot of confusion, and in the cases of what we've heard from DOGE and from Elon Musk, accounting principles are just out the door. I mean, clearly the institutions have been very happy to, kind of hide the peas, so to speak, and the shell's moving. It's a bit of a shell game. So will we ever get down, to the bottom and find out exactly? I don't know. But more and more, I become increasingly skeptical because the bureaucracy is so well established. It's so big. I mean, we still can't figure out certain obvious things. Even the most recent assassination attempt on President Trump. So many details still out there. The government has a way of hiding the peas, so to speak, and it's going to make it difficult. And, the hope that maybe we would all get a $5,000 dividend because of this found money. Hey, don't go spending the check yet. Okay. It's what I'd recommend. So let's slow it down. We'll talk with Michael Busler about that. And then also we're going to be talking with Leslie Corbley. Leslie is she's a self-proclaimed anti-feminist attorney. She's an author and columnist. And she asked, are we in a constitutional crisis? I mean, this is kind of the language of the left. Every time, something doesn't go their way. And of course, right now it hasn't gone their way for a while. And, that's all they can talk about is the sky is falling. The sky is falling. It's like Pinky Lee here. No, it's not falling, but everything is a constitutional crisis. And the constitutional crisis that they're noting seems to be coming from their end. The interruption and disruption of what they're doing in terms of a smooth transition of one administration to another. The left, the Democrats don't like the policies of the Republicans any more than Republicans like the policies of the Democrats. Well, the American people didn't like the policies of the Democrats either. And they voted quite clearly, right? Said, hey, get that out of here. Donald Trump's our guy. We want him to come in and straighten this mess up. And they gave him the mandate, said, go correct it. We believe that you're the guy who's going to be able to take care of the border crisis that we've been experiencing, take care of inflation, take care of the energy crisis, get us back on a foothold of energy to where we could become, beyond energy independent, become energy dominant, and then also, improve our standing on the world stage. Now, there were some things that Donald Trump could do pretty quick, and he's been able to do that quite effectively in here, about 6 weeks of this administration, roughly. I mean, it's amazing what he's been able to accomplish. But some of these other things, like dealing with with inflation, these are Biden's numbers still. In fact, our guest, Dr. Michael Busler, is with us right now. Let's bring Michael on, and he can break that down a little bit more. Dr. Michael Busler, welcome to the show. Good to have you with us, sir.
Well, hi, Bill. Thanks for having me. As you know, it's always my pleasure to be here.
Well, Michael, we talk about where Trump is right now, moving at the speed of Trump on Trump time. And, the thing is that people are getting, it's kind of amazing, how, I guess, how impatient we are as a nation. We think Trump's going to come in and fix inflation right away. But what he's dealing with is still cleaning up the mess that Biden left behind, right?
Exactly. And in order to clean up this mess, it's going to take him a little bit of time. Now, everything else he can do quickly, he's done quickly, and he's moving as fast as he can. But let's look at it. Why is it that we have such high inflation and it is so stubborn and hard to get down to where we'd like it? Mm-hmm. Three main reasons for it. One, when the Biden administration, literally the first day, was sworn into office, he took action to significantly decrease the supply of energy. Mm-hmm. And when you decrease the supply of energy, the price goes up. He canceled the Keystone Pipeline. He made permitting process more difficult. You can't drill on federal lands. All that decreased production of oil and gasoline. And the decrease in the supply led to higher prices. Now, people are going to argue back, well, wait a minute. At the end of Biden's term, he was producing more than when he started. And that's true. Mm-hmm. But we had a big drop in production. And then gradually over the 4 years, they were able to increase somewhat. But had he not taken that action, we would have probably be producing between 1 million and 1.5 million barrels per day more than we are currently producing. And that's what Trump is trying to do. So it takes a little time to do that, but I would estimate by the middle of the third quarter of this year, you're going to start to see energy prices drop significantly. So that's the first reason we have.
Well, the other thing too, Michael, can we say anything about the Strategic Petroleum Reserve that Biden emptied?
Yeah, remember Trump filled that up with extremely cheap oil. As a matter of fact,
didn't they pay us for it?
I was just going to say that much of that during COVID, and nobody was taking any oil, and the oil producing nations need to have the tankers loaded and get back to put more oil on. Nobody would take oil. The price of oil plummeted so low that the oil producers, the foreign oil producers, said, we'll pay you to take the oil. They paid us $37 a barrel to unload their ships. And Trump said, well, I'm going to fill up the oil reserve. Mm-hmm. So Biden, in order to keep the price of energy down as low as he could, and his actions drove it way up, but to soften that a little bit, he started emptying the strategic reserve. It's now less than half full. That could create some problems further down the road.
And wasn't that against the law, though, Michael? Because the only time you can go into the strategic reserve is with an emergency. I guess the Democratic Party perceived the midterm elections as an emergency, right?
He declared a national emergency when energy prices were going up that high. He tried to get oil from Venezuela too, which is a little strange. But so he took some out of the reserve and he declared an emergency so he could do that. Yeah. So the first reason we had inflation was energy. Second reason, massive increases in government spending in 2019. Between 2019 and 2024, there was a 50% increase in government spending from 4.5 trillion up to nearly 7 trillion. Since we didn't have that money, that became borrowed money. So it created a huge deficits every year, a massive public debt, but all that excess demand in the economy pulled prices up. So it's the second reason we had inflation. Third reason was the Federal Reserve just fell asleep. When inflation started going up in January of 2021, and that's when it started, for a year and a half, the Federal Reserve did absolutely nothing. They said, don't worry, it'll go away by itself. It's
transitory.
Yeah. Well, obviously that didn't work. And finally, in June of 2022, they said that didn't work. We're going to have to drastically increase interest rates, which they did. It brought inflation down. And then for some reason, it wasn't down to the 2% target, although it was close, down to 2.4%. And then for some reason, they started cutting interest rates in September, November, and December of last year. As I said it would do, it did. Right. Now the inflation went from 2.4 up to 3%. So Trump will eventually replace the chair of the Federal Reserve, but he can't do that until next February. In the meantime, he's going to dramatically increase the supply of energy. That'll bring the price down. Again, you won't see it until towards the end of this year because it takes time. But he'll do that. And secondly, he's going to drastically cut government spending. And with Elon Musk and through DOGE, he's finding billions, tens of billions, maybe hundreds of billions of dollars we're spending on literally stupid things. So he's going to cut all that. And by reducing the government spending, by increasing the supply of energy and bringing energy prices down, can't deal with the Fed until you get somebody else in there, but just those two things will bring inflation down. I wrote in Newsmax this morning, no worries, the long-term economic outlook looks very rosy. So in the next few months, we're going to see some not so good numbers. Inflation may inch up a little bit. The economy is starting to slow down. The fourth quarter of last year, GDP, which had been growing at a 3% rate, dropped to 2.3%. Last year, we had the largest number of bankruptcies ever by business ever in the U.S. So things are starting to slow down, but Trump will get rid of these regulations that stop business from expanding and stop new businesses from starting. He'll reduce the cost of energy, which makes it much easier for business and consumers. And he'll drastically cut government spending and try as best as he can to try to balance the budget as soon as possible. Now we're running a $2 trillion deficit, so that's going to take some time too.
Exactly, without a doubt. He's a public policy analyst, economics expert, and professor of finance at Stockton University in New Jersey. Dr. Michael Busler is our guest. Michael, with all these pressures, on our economy, I like your tempered approach on this, that it's going to take some time in order to get there, because we're still getting through what Joe Biden did, not to mention the fact that he exacerbated the problem on his way out, according to the government, is that he spent close to $1 trillion out of nowhere that was just kind of wasted. I mean, it was almost like he was pitching a fit and was just throwing gold bars over the over the rails here as he was leaving Dodge.
Unfortunately, Elon Musk is finding a lot of this, and before it gets spent, he's stopping this. So that's part of what he's going to do to reduce the government spending. The other thing Biden did was, I guess he did this through executive order. He said you can't drill on lands in the water around the U.S. and the Gulf of Mexico. I think Trump's trying to get around
the Gulf of America now.
I was just going to say Trump's trying to get around this. He renamed it the Gulf of America, so it won't apply there, I suppose. But Trump will do everything he can to reverse, and it's going to take time. There's laws involved here, and the court system takes time to operate. But he's going to do everything he can to turn American energy companies loose and to turn American enterprise loose and let the American spirit drive this big increase in American production, which will bring energy prices down, will bring inflation down, will create job opportunities for all well-prepared Americans. As I wrote in my column today, the economic golden years are right around the corner.
And the Democrats and those on the left are doing everything they can, Michael, to impede that. In fact, to your point here, I was reading where there are 100, I think over 100 federal lawsuits against Trump's policies. There's been 21 rulings already. I mean, if we don't get the Supreme Court to come in and put a stop to this nonsense, I mean, because we're burning time here. Trump only has 4 years. He has less than 4 years in which to do the people's bidding. And the American people need to take note as to who's for us and who's against us, right?
I'm wondering whose side the Democrats are on. Everything is not Trump. They just want to get back in power, even if what Trump is doing, it benefits greatly the American people. And that's what they're supposed to be for, actions that benefit greatly the American people. So I'm not quite sure what their logic is, except they just want to get Trump out and get some of their people in there. But
well, it's not about logic. It's about emotion. You know, it's like one of our guests said, I'm sorry, your emotion cannot trump my facts. And the facts, common sense facts, are quite clear. But and all the Democrats can do right now, because that's what they got away with for so long. The mainstream media, social media, the cabal that was going on at every turn, they supported, this narrative, and it was all based on emotion. Well, at some point, you've got to pay the bills. And the Democrats came up, and they came up empty. They didn't have the money to pay the bills.
And the Democrats will continue to play on emotions even tomorrow during Trump's speech. Look, the federal government employs over 2 million people. We don't need all of those people to get all the job done. Remember when Elon Musk bought Twitter, he reduced the workforce by 75%.
Almost 80%.
And
I think you and I talked about this.
Yeah.
That's the old Pareto principle, right? That 20% will give you 80% of the yield. And so he cuts down his labor force there at X, was then Twitter, and he cuts it down 20%. And it was like he didn't miss a step.
It's still operating very efficiently. And Musk has his band of techno nerds, and they go in there and they say, look, we can modernize all this. We can modernize the federal government. We can use all the technology that we have today. We don't need 2 million people. So what are the Democrats going to do? They're going to take some of these people that have been laid off by the government already. They're going to bring them into Congress tomorrow night and say, look, this is what Trump has done. These people have all lost their jobs. What are they going to do? Here's a pregnant mom who is going to lose her health insurance. So they're going to try to appeal on emotions. But the fact is, we can't afford all of these people.
Exactly.
Our taxes are already too high. The public debt is $36 trillion. Now people say, well, what does that mean? Well, 36 trillion, the interest alone is over $900 billion now, soon to hit $1 trillion. We can't afford to spend that much money, number one. And number two, if the government is pulling all this money out of capital markets, we're going to end up with a capital shortage. So companies won't be able to grow. We can't kick the can down the road anymore. Every president since Ronald Reagan has kicked the can down the road in terms of the deficit and the debt. We're at the end of the road. We need to do something now, not just with a scalpel. We need to go in with a chainsaw and start killing this before it really turns into a serious problem that we can't handle. And what do we tell our kids and our grandkids? You have to somehow figure this out? Not fair.
Well, Michael, you make a great point here, and this is where leadership is so required. And when you think of the leadership that's out there, who but Trump can communicate with the American people to say, look, there's going to be some pain here in River City, but I want you to know it's truly going to be transitory. It's not going to be long term. I think that had Biden had a plan, for example, with the whole climate agenda, But they've been going on for decades on this. If they said, look, it's going to be worth the investment, even if you said, trust me, you might even believe that there could be that possibility. They didn't even give us that kind of consideration. They just shoved it down our throats, and they mandated what kind of car we were going to drive, what kind of light bulb we were going to screw into our lamps, and what kind of stove we were going to have in the kitchen. I mean, it was absurd. For what gain? What, after all that they imposed upon us, is America better off today or worse off?
I think they're worse off. The problem is with them, they don't consider the long term.
Right.
And they put things in, say, let's fix this, let's fix that. And they don't consider the long term. Well, now the long term's coming, and all of their policies are causing more harm than benefit to us. And it's a good thing Trump got in when he did. Another 4 years or so of these policies would have put America into such a deep hole. I don't know how we'd be able to get out of it. And you know what I admire most about Trump? You have to love the policies. Now, a lot of people say, well, he has a lot of personality flaws. He's always criticizing people and saying things.
Don't we all?
I was going to say, if that's the worst problem, I think we're in good shape. But Trump's coming in and he's saying, prior administrations, they say, well, we have a spending problem. Well, let's form a bipartisan committee. We'll take a look at this in Congress. We'll present a plan to Congress. We'll let both parties debate it, and then we'll come up, and maybe by the end of the year, we'll be able to come up with something. Mm-hmm. And what they've done in the past, they said, look, we spent so much last year. We're going to increase spending by 5% this year. You're right. We'll cut it down to 3%. Mm-hmm. So we've cut the budget, is what they say. Trump said, I don't want any of this. I'm going in today, and I'm cutting everything. Some agencies, it looks like we don't need any of it. Mm-hmm. So what Musk is saying, let's cut everything out, and the things that are important, let's add back, rather than keeping this big monstrosity and trying to cut down. We need Donald Trump right now, and it's a good thing for America that we have him.
Well, I think that America got a little glimpse as to what's going on, based on what you and I were talking about in terms of emotion versus fact. I remember reading a book on Harold Janine, the former president of ITT. I mean, this guy was unbelievable. Talk about the CEO of CEOs. I think he ran over 140 companies, Michael. And I mean, it was amazing. And what he would always say whenever he came into a room is just, give me the facts. I want to know the facts, right? He didn't have time for all the fluff, the emotion. Just give me the facts. And that's how you're able to run 140, I think over 140 companies that he ran. And Donald Trump, what we saw in the Oval Office with one Zelensky, was that Zelensky came with emotion, Trump had facts, and the party's over.
And that's what Musk is digging up.
Yes.
Give me the facts on exactly how much we're spending, not how much you think we spend and you're hiding some here and some. Give me the facts. And when you look at the facts, we don't need to spend all this money, and we're not going to spend it. We're not going through Congress. We're not going to have committees. We're just going to say he's the executive branch. Congress authorizes the spending. The executive branch spends it. We're not spending any of this money anymore. We'll cut it out, and where the need truly is, we'll add that back in. That's going to have very positive results going forward.
And that's what I'm hearing. I'm not hearing that everything is just going to go away. Absolutely. But really, some of this stuff is so silly that it's bipartisan disapproval, spending, millions of dollars for condoms and, and
$20 million for like $20 million to build Sesame Street in Iraq.
Yeah.
I mean, American taxpayers can't afford that. Musk, on his website, he'll list all of the ridiculous things that we're spending money on. And you just have to scratch your head and say, how long has this been going on? And how many billions of dollars and hundreds of billions of dollars have we spent that's coming out of our pocket? It's not somebody else's money. It's coming out of our pocket. They've been in my pocket long enough. They've gone in too deeply. And we all feel the same way, I think, at least most of us do, that we want this ridiculous.
Yeah, you look at the polling, Michael, a majority of the Americans said they've had it, because the thing is, what they're seeing, and they don't know quite the whole truth, is yes, it's out of your pocket, and it's going to these NGOs and these other interest, but then it comes back to these government officials to reelect Democrats. I mean, it is a mess. And if we know the whole truth, I mean, people are really going to be upset even more than they are right now. Dr. Michael Busler has been our guest. We always appreciate Michael on the show to give us clarity. He's the public policy analyst, economics expert, and professor of finance at Stockton University. Michael, thank you so much for being with us. Take care. Godspeed, my friend.
Take care, Bill. See you soon.
You got it. Well, coming up next on Bill Martinez Live, as I mentioned to you, we've got Leslie Corbley, who's going to be with us. She's an attorney, author, and columnist. And she asked the question because, it's being thrown out there all the time by the Democrats. Oh, everything's a constitutional crisis. Look, the sky is falling. And Leslie Corbley is with us right now. Leslie, welcome to the show. Good to have you with us.
Thanks for having me.
Well, here it is. We're in a constitutional crisis. It's like, oh my goodness, where's my pearls? I'm clutching them so tightly. It's just amazing. I mean, Donald Trump gets reelected. I'm moving to, what was it? This cracked me up. It was a producer of a show. I'm moving to New Zealand. They go, well, who do you think takes care of New Zealand? It's America, ding dong. I don't know. You have to laugh at the silliness of it all, Leslie.
Yes, for sure. And that's, the new phrase, I suppose. I mean, you heard it a lot during his first term in office as well, that Donald Trump was going to instigate a constitutional crisis. But I think the real constitutional crisis, frankly, has been ongoing for some time. And it's been this decades-long march in decades-long approach that Congress has taken to essentially neutering themselves, right? So
exactly.
Congress doesn't have the role. Congress is supposed to take on the role in the constitutional system of enacting the will of the people, right? It's supposed to represent the consent of the governed, and that's unfortunately simply not a role that Congress is currently embodying.
Well, they've subordinated it to the bureaucratic class.
Yes.
All for the sake of not having accountability. So they could go to their constituency and claim plausible deniability. It wasn't me, but the thing is, it's so disingenuous. They can't even admit it's the bureaucratic class. They just say it's not me.
Yes, and this is something that I think the public is becoming aware of as far as how consent operates over time. So obviously, Americans did vote for prior congressmen and women who, unfortunately, like I've said, have abdicated the responsibility of legislating to the executive branch. But the problem is, as you move forward in time, that consent wears down, right? So take, for example, something like the very draconian measures that came with FDR back in the 1940s, where he greatly expanded government. Well, you can't really blame people in 1980 for having inefficient systems that were set up in 1940, right? So someone voted for that, right? The public voted for it at one point. The problem is that it's very difficult for future generations to outvote, to exercise their consent, to say we no longer want to be governed in this way, because you have entire apparatuses, government agencies, bureaucratic systems set up that make it extremely difficult to undo, frankly, the damage that was done by prior generations. And so I think that's one of the real crisis we're in, is that we have a constitutional system, we have systems of checks and balances, separation of powers, for example, is of course incredibly important. But our government no longer really operates from a practical standpoint on the principles that it was founded on, because again, that's very difficult to do when you have an entire branch of government that has functionally abdicated its authority to the executive. So frankly, if to the extent the leftists are very concerned that Donald Trump can act like a dictator, it's because he's been given that authority, because the executive branch has been emboldened and given so much power that frankly it shouldn't have.
Right. The thing that's amazing that people are missing out in the way this stuff has been institutionalized, Leslie, is that the fix is in. I mean, the left, they have set up a system in such that, we're going to give people a lot of stuff, and we're going to buy their votes. They're going to buy their votes with taxpayers' money. Republican, independent, Democrats, it doesn't matter. It's bipartisan money going to buy their votes. And so once they buy their votes and they get them in the system and they say, hey, you get to vote again. What are you going to vote for? We're going to vote for more of that stuff, right? And so that's how the wheels on the bus have been going round and round. and how crazy this is, and why, when you want to have a reasonable conversation about, hey, we've got to back off on government. We got to make sure that these programs, those goodies that you like, that they're going to be there for generations to come for all the right reasons. But we need to be responsible stewards of that. Then you got the outcry because it messes up the institutional, wherewithal and the infrastructure that's been established for one reason only, and that is to get the Democrats reelected.
Yes, it's very fascinating because I think you bring up some really good points, but I think it's really interesting, for example, that we're talking about entering a constitutional crisis when Donald Trump's main goal, it seems, is to reduce government
Yeah.
authority and power, generally speaking, right? He's not exactly trying to expand government.
It's actually becoming more constitutionalized.
Yeah, so he's trying to constrict government,
Right.
which again is difficult, even from a constitutional standpoint, because once Congress has acted to empower the executive, it makes it difficult for the executive to claw that back. So where there's that statutory authority that comes directly from Congress, things get quite a bit more dicey. That being said, the overall thrust of what he's trying to accomplish, his agenda, so to speak, is not exactly to create new bureaucracies or to create more government interference. It's quite frankly to do the opposite. So it's a rather bizarre notion, he's a rather bizarre dictator if his goal is to reduce the power of the bureaucracy.
He's a bad dictator. That's
I
just
know, he wields.
It's like the January 6th, insurgents. They were terrible insurgents. Nobody brought a gun.
Right. So there's something about that doesn't jive, right? And this is kind of regardless of where you fall on his policies, right? Maybe you think there's better ways to do this. Maybe you're someone who thinks that certain things he's doing shouldn't be done. I find that bizarre, just as an initial matter. As a second point that I think you do bring up, and it's very important for the public to understand, is that it is undoubtedly and indisputably true that the Democratic Party has a overwhelming advantage in the federal bureaucracy. So if you were to just look at who is staffed in these agencies, it has a massive left-wing bent, and it has for a very long time. That's very entrenched. It's entrenched culturally in Washington, D.C., and it's entrenched within the bureaucratic system itself. And so this idea that, the Democratic Party it only cares about what Trump is doing to the extent they care about the people and the public, I think is quite disingenuous. In reality, they have entrenched interests within the bureaucratic system, and disrupting those interests obviously is not something that goes well. It is not in their best interest, right? So again, that for the public, though, is not great because the public's interest and the Democratic Party's interests aren't necessarily aligned. And I think that's where the Democratic Party is really losing its focus, because for so long they were able to really use messaging regarding compassion, kindness, tolerance, so on and so forth, to try to align the Democratic Party's interests with the interests of the public. And now I think we're moving into a political landscape that frankly recognizes that those interests are not aligned. And so the public is moving away from the Democratic Party, and it's becoming hard for them to hold on to power. So obviously if Donald Trump comes in and disrupts the bureaucratic strongholds they have, that doesn't bode well for them in the future.
Right, exactly. Well, with the help of the mainstream media and the bureaucratic class and everything, like you said, the infrastructure is well established. The emotional message could sell. And it was frustrating, for people who sit there and go, wait a minute, this doesn't make sense. But it took somebody like Donald Trump, to break through that barrier, that emotional barrier, to be able to connect with the people, and finally for them to understand, oh, that's right. That's common sense. That doesn't make sense. I mean, step away from my emotion for a minute and realize that $36 trillion in debt, no bueno, open borders, where you got gang members coming in and killing your relatives, fentanyl running rapid, 100,000 people dying every year, people able to, men able to go into women's restrooms, compete against women in the sports, and, strip them of their scholarship availability and awards and things like that. I mean, it defies common sense. And so then what happened is it became a choice, a very clear binary choice. Either you want common sense or you want this emotional, hollow stuff that you've been putting up with for all intent and purposes for 12 years. Maybe you got a little bit of break with, Donald Trump in the middle, but you had 8 years of Obama and 4 years of Joe Biden. And how did that work? At the end of the day, how did that work for you?
Well, it didn't work great, but I think this frankly goes far beyond just the past, several presidents. I think this
Oh,
has
yeah,
been
without
percolating for some time, and you're
sure.
absolutely correct regarding the stranglehold on communication. Some of this, I think, also is driven by social media, and specifically the fact that Elon Musk bought Twitter, or now X.
What a
This,
godsend, huh? If
I
he
mean,
hadn't bought X,
the streams of communication now are open in a way they simply weren't before. So the Democrats and those on the left could control the Overton window. They really could control what
yeah.
was in the realm of acceptable discourse for the past. I mean, really, this has been ongoing. That's a story, frankly, I think of the 20th to early 21st century is that, you
Mhm.
know, progressives and those on the left were, a, their power rose in the 20th century. And it was pretty much, I think, they had strong reason to believe moving into the 21st century that they were going to be able to continue to control the narrative.
Mhm.
And as with all, large sources of power, power corrupts, right? So it shouldn't
Right.
come as any shock that as Washington D.C. got bigger and accumulated more power, that was more centralized, that actually became detached from the public's interests. I mean, this is what the founders contemplated, and it's one reason they have separate the separation of powers mattered. It's also one of the reasons that the founders were very intentional about having the public's interest represented both at a democratic level, right, where you democratically elect your like Congress people,
Mhm.
congressmen and women,
Representatives,
but
right?
also why was contemplated that the Senate should actually be slightly more detached from the public because that gives a better perspective. Because obviously when populism is on the rise, there can be problems with mob rule and problems with
Right.
democratic sources of governance, and so the founders were very intentional about trying to represent the interests of the public both very close to home, right, and also a little further away. And I think
Mhm.
we've really moved away from that model. And frankly, again, the Democratic Party had a stranglehold on the
Yeah.
ability to control discourse, and that is going away. And that is, I think you are absolutely right. For whether one likes it or not, Donald Trump was the one who was able to break through that communicative stronghold and speak to people where they were at,
Mhm.
and bring entire constituencies into the Republican Party that prior to that had no interest in engaging in politics at all.
We're talking with Leslie Corbley, the author and speaker and attorney. And Leslie, going back to the media and what you were saying earlier, Mark Zuckerberg, before the election, comes out and he starts confessing his sins, I guess, in a sense, and but especially after the election, and saying, "Hey, it was the FBI. They made me do it." And which I thought was quite fascinating because that was quite telling when he came out from underneath that thumb, that the oppression that he must have felt over the years with Joe Biden, the FBI, crawling at his, yelling at them, yelling at their people, he would say, kind of thing. And I mean, and this is what happens with power. It always goes one step too far. It kind of reminds me a little bit, this is before your time, of the Richard Nixon administration, because President Nixon just went a little too far. He didn't have to, which amazes me. I mean, here he is. You talk about popular vote and how many states that he won in that definitive election, and yet he ends up shooting himself in the foot. His people do because of their arrogance.
Yes, you're absolutely right. And I think another thing to note that's really important related to the communication stronghold Democrats had was it seems that it was largely astroturf in the sense of I don't know if you watched Mark Zuckerberg's interview with Joe Rogan
Yes,
after
I
the
did.
election, where it doesn't seem like Mark Zuckerberg's really a true believer in the sense of being like a Democrat zealot. And I think
Mm.
that's true of a lot of people who felt as though they needed to curry favor with those on the left because that's how you could either get your message out there, that's how you could avoid bad press and terrible PR slip ups. That's how you could avoid journalists maybe asking gotcha questions,
How
because it
about
all
how
went
about
the
how
other
about some
way.
lawfare that'll just
Yes,
waste
or
all
or
kinds
that.
of dividend
And
funds, right?
and I think Donald Trump was effective, frankly, at changing that dynamic by simply not caring. Now, there's a concern that I think is valid that maybe we're going to move into an era where the word compassion is almost a dirty word, and I think that we might likely go too far in that way for a while. But it's again understandable because when you weaponize, love, compassion, tolerance, all these words that actually have good meaning, then
Right.
eventually the public becomes cynical towards them, right?
Mm.
They hear those words
That's
and they
the
simply
risk.
don't care,
You're right.
right?
That's a good point.
So if you cry wolf too many times, people simply don't care about that perspective anymore. They
Right.
don't care about seeing someone's tears on screen anymore. And again, there's a cost to that. I'm not saying we should become callous as a people, but I do think we need to recognize the dynamic we're in and
Mm.
why people are possibly turning away from being as easily emotionally manipulated. And frankly, it is because emotional manipulation was a very well played ploy and a great tactic of the Democratic Party for decades. And I think they're
Right.
losing their ability to do that. And it's, I think, causing panic on that side of the aisle because that's, again, that's one of their go to tools in their,
Right.
and
In the
their
toolbox. Yeah,
public
exactly.
relations toolkit
Right.
was to go to emotionalism. And
Exactly.
it's going to be difficult for them to continue doing that moving forward.
Well, heads up, tomorrow night they're going to bring it out, right? I mean, that's the suggestion is they're going to have people, federal employees who have been affected by Doge and Elon Musk, and you're right. I think we need to be sensitive about the compassion issue because people are going to lose jobs. I mean, we've all been
Mhm.
there before ourselves. We've lost jobs. I mean, I haven't had a government job like they have, where they're so highly compensated and could work out of their own home and even have another job and double dip, so to speak. And I mean, the kind of shenanigans that have taken place. I'm not saying all federal employees did that, but we know a number of them did. They took advantage of the taxpayer, and shame on them for doing it. And so that, unfortunately, for people who have, I guess some legitimacy and have earned some compassion, that's going to get lost in translation because of those that abused us, right?
Well, yes, absolutely. And I think it's actually really important to highlight the media's role in
Mhm.
these issues because the reality is human interest stories, journalism, feature stories, and whatnot are very important for the public. And it's actually very important that multiple viewpoints, that human events are, that there's humanization across all viewpoints, right?
Mhm.
And so the reality is there was no corresponding concern about individuals who didn't take the COVID vaccine and lost their jobs, despite the
Right.
fact that that was very, trying to force
Oh,
people to take
yeah.
the COVID vaccine was, that was something you were supposed to applaud. You weren't supposed to care when someone lost their job for saying, "I really don't think I want a new vaccine that hit the market last month to be something I really feel as if I need to take. I don't think the risks are worth it, right? Or I don't think the benefits are worth the risks."
Mhm.
So I think that the fact that some human subjects, like there's only certain human subjects that the media has classically deemed worthy of our compassion and our sympathy and receiving any kind of human care is a very important element to this. I actually think most reasonable Americans have a base level of empathy for each
Mhm.
other, regardless of which side of the aisle they're on. But for again, decades and decades, only certain subjects were able to be covered as if their pain mattered, right?
Mhm.
So everyone else's, to the extent that liberal policy impacted individuals negatively, that just sort of was not covered. It tended to be, swept under the rug, and that's where Donald Trump was very effective. I mean, the same can be true of a lot of issues, right? So if there's a COVID vaccine as it relates to unemployment, that's treated very differently than the DOGE cuts. You have the same thing with the transgender issues, where those on the left will really shine a spotlight on individuals struggling with gender identity or those who maybe want to identify as transgender, but they have really zero empathy for some of the girls who are complaining of lack of privacy in their spaces,
Exactly. Yeah.
whether that's
Mhm.
bathroom, women's sports, or other issues, locker rooms. I mean, so there's all these issues, and there's only one angle
Mhm.
for human empathy, right? And that's,
Right.
I think, a major problem that the Democratic Party is running into because it's quite selective and, frankly, quite discriminatory. And I think increasingly the public
Mhm.
is not particularly buying into the narratives that they're selling them about compassion and love.
But yet, the public, we the people, have to look at this as an opportunity of how do we demonstrate empathy and love in the midst
Yes.
of something that we don't agree with? How do you find that ground? And especially when it seems that the left, especially like the trans movement and stuff like that, you look at what's going on, it's very aggressive. I mean,
Yeah.
extremely aggressive to death, even. I mean, it gets
Mhm.
that radical. So it really has everybody, on guard, walking pins and needles. We don't want to offend anybody, but by the same token, we don't want to be offended either. And so this is going to be a process. I'm glad you brought this up because this is going to be a process. It's going to take some time for us to, kind of, grow through this, right?
Absolutely. I think that my hope is that we're moving from a politics that focuses heavily on values to one that focuses on interest. So let me say what that means. So everyone has values, right? So if I'm religious, I have certain religious values. If I'm a
Right.
secular humanist, I have different values. And I think for a long time, politics was spoken of through the lens of values, right? Like we have certain values and we should govern accordingly. Now that's true. But what is also true is that different policies and different policies will have different trade-offs, and those trade-offs will involve different individuals or entities sets of interests.
Mhm.
And I think we need to pair understanding our values with an understanding of who has an interest in what is the public's interest in certain types of legislation, what is the public's interest in cutting government, who wins and who loses if certain policies are enacted or not, right? And I think that having that understanding of whose interests are at play hopefully can lead individuals to begin to step in each other's shoes a bit easier, right? Because
Right.
if you and I have mutually exclusive values,
Mhm.
there's only so far you can go. But if I understand you have a different interest than I do, I can imagine what it would be like to have that interest, right?
Right.
And so I think that there's a practicality to looking at interests that doesn't exist in the realm of values. Again, because if you don't
Mhm.
buy into a worldview, you simply don't hold the values.
Mhm. But it takes a certain amount of intellect and
Yes.
and fairness in order to get there. I mean, if you're, like Jordan Peterson said, if you're so ideologically fixed, you've rendered yourself stupid. We can't have a conversation. So we've got to get out of those silos to be able to say, okay, hey, at the end of the day, what do you want? What do you want? What do I want? And can we may come at it from a different direction, but are we heading to a a destination that's somewhat in the zip code? You know?
Yeah, I think we're gonna have to become a lot more comfortable with talking across divide, and I think that's frankly gonna require people to be very more comfortable than we are currently in our culture with
Yeah.
offense, right? So if I can't understand where you're coming from because everything you say offends me, then it's we can't really have a productive conversation, and there's really nowhere you can go. So you have to be willing to hear things you find offensive and grapple with ideas that you don't agree with. Now, those again on the left, I think, are weaker at that. Not innately. I'm not saying those on the left are innately
Well,
worse
they
at this,
just they don't
but
have a lot of practice with it.
that's exactly what I'm getting at. They've
Mhm.
controlled the levers of communicative power for so long that they simply didn't really generally have to contend with ideas they found to be that distasteful, right? So
Mhm.
hold the when you hold the power in journalism, media, education, and
Mhm.
you just there aren't very many elite avenues that you could go down where right wing views are favored. So I
Mhm.
think that will require those on the left, frankly, to be willing to come to the table in good faith and willing to listen to ideas they find repugnant. And I mean, some ideas are repugnant and should be thrown aside, fair enough, but you
Mhm.
have to be willing to listen to them and contend with different ideas rather than just using pejoratives to
Exactly.
attempt to tarnish the reputation of your opponents. And that's been their classic approach to
Right.
these issues, at least for the past 20, 30 years at
Right.
least, if not longer.
Yeah, because if I can emotionalize it, then I can invalidate you and you're out of the debate, right?
Yes.
Mhm.
Very
So
unhelpful.
that's it. I win, you lose. Instead of us both winning because we want the same thing. But this is where the country is, and this is the clear divide. Is I don't believe that the country in total wants the same thing.
I think you're actually right that most individuals who are not highly ideological could come to reasonable agreement on a lot of issues. I think you're right about that there's far more common ground than we realize. But I think that unfortunately, a lot of the systems and the systems like education, for example, or particularly higher education, really incentivize ideological thinking. There's not a lot of cross pollination of ideas, and individuals are really pushed through the schooling system in a way that leads them to think certain ideas are innately good and moral and others are innately bad. Now, again, that's obviously true on some level, but I think it's a highly ideologically driven and
Right.
politically motivated right now rather than, something simple like I think we can all agree that lying is wrong, or that slavery was a horrific institution that's been around in human history for far too long and shouldn't exist, right? I mean, these are things I think we can all agree on, but education goes, I think, much further than that and into a realm of ideological, like it polarizes the public, frankly, because it, again, creates a lot of unnecessary division.
Well, Leslie, we got to leave it there. I cannot thank you enough for coming on the show. She's the author of Silent Suffering, Poems of Pain and Purpose, a self-declared anti-feminist attorney and columnist. And again, how can people be in touch with you?
Sure. So LeslieCorbley.com is the easiest way to find a copy of the book. I also will be releasing another book this year. I signed a contract, and so the manuscript is into the publisher. That will be forthcoming, and so more information to be found on LeslieCorbley.com. That's the best way to find me.
Leslie Corbley, the one and only. Hey, thank you so much for being with us. Take care.
Thanks so much for having me.
All right. Have a great day. I'll tell you, we're so blessed to have guests like Leslie and, of course, Dr. Michael Busler to be able to bring, a broader sense of communication, understanding, and news information for you to digest and choose wisely, so that the consent of the governed, which is what this is all about, that you've got the truth, you've got the facts that you need in order to make an intelligent decision. Thank you for sharing a part of your day with us. Appreciate you being here with us. May God bless you and keep you. May he make his face shine upon you, and may he be gracious unto you, and may you experience his peace. Thanks for being with us. God bless.